You think hiking is just about fresh air and scenic views. But what if the forest hides secrets that don't want to be found? What if the trail you trust suddenly twists into something you can't escape? Tonight, you'll hear stories from people who set out expecting a simple adventure, only to face moments so strange, so terrifying, they still question if what happened was even real. No dramatic retelling, no ghost stories. These are true encounters with the unknown, from places where the wilderness itself seems to turn against you. If you've ever wondered what really lurks beyond the path, this is your answer. Stay close, because once you hear these stories, the woods will never feel safe again. But before we get started, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey into the darkness is just the beginning. These stories are only going to get more terrifying, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because the night is only getting started, and the horror is about to unfold. In the late summer of 2019, a close-knit group of 4 friends, Mark, Emily, Jake, and Lisa, set out with high spirits and heavy backpacks to explore a trail few had seen in decades. Their destination was Cedar Ridge, a remote hiking path deep in the Pacific Northwest forests, a place swallowed by nature and nearly erased from modern maps. What had once been a well-used logging route was now choked with overgrowth, the wooden signs worn and faded, and the trail itself barely visible beneath fallen leaves and twisted roots. Locals rarely spoke of Cedar Ridge aloud, and when they did, it was in hushed tones around campfires, accompanied by nervous glances. Strange disappearances had long been linked to the area. Hikers and hunters who never returned, search parties that found only abandoned supplies or broken branches in their wake. No official record explained these vanishings. No bodies were ever found. The forest seemed to reclaim anyone who dared to linger too long. Despite these warnings, the 4 friends, confident in their skills and eager for solitude, were drawn to Cedar Ridge by its mystery and challenge. They shared stories on the drive there, laughing and speculating about what they might find, unaware that the forest held a silence far heavier than the quiet of untouched wilderness. The air itself seemed charged with an unseen presence, as if the trees bore witness to the passage of those who had vanished before them. As they crossed the threshold into Cedar Ridge, they stepped into a place where time warped and shadows lengthened, a place where the line between the natural and something else blurred, waiting to pull them into its depths. As the group pressed deeper into Cedar Ridge, the forest began to change around them. The usual sounds of the wilderness, birdsong, the rustling of small creatures, the gentle creak of branches swaying in the breeze, all but vanished. An unnatural silence settled over the trail, heavy and oppressive, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The thick canopy above blocked out most of the fading daylight, and a creeping fog began to roll in, softening the edges of trees and rocks until everything blurred into a muted haze. The fog wasn't the only strange thing. With each step forward, subtle oddities began to unsettle the group. Footsteps echoed behind them, but when they glanced back, there was no one in sight. The sounds didn't match the pace or direction of the group's own movements, sometimes growing louder, other times fading as if carried on the wind from an unseen source. It was as though someone, or something, was following just beyond their vision, moving silently through the dense underbrush. Then there were the whispers. Faint at first, almost like the rustle of leaves, but unmistakably voices, low murmurs, unintelligible and urgent, drifting through the fog. The words were impossible to catch, but the tone was unmistakably warning, or perhaps invitation. Lisa, the most sensitive of the group, stopped several times, her face pale, her eyes scanning the dim forest with growing dread. The trail, once clear and defined, began to dissolve underfoot. Fallen branches crunched oddly, and what should have been soft moss now felt oddly brittle. The fog thickened, pressing in closer, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. The familiar world they had known as hikers, maps, GPS, the sun's position, all seemed to lose meaning here. With every step, the forest grew stranger, the silence louder, and the feeling that something watched them, just beyond the veil of mist, became impossible to ignore. As the fog thickened and the silence pressed in around them, the group's unease grew heavier with every passing moment. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond their sight line, and the whispers grew more insistent, weaving through the trees like restless spirits. Then, late in the afternoon, The unnerving quiet was broken by a sudden, sharp noise, a crackling snap somewhere deep in the woods, unlike any natural sound. Mike, the most adventurous of the group, volunteered to investigate. Despite the warnings etched into the atmosphere, he moved toward the source of the sound, his footsteps swallowed quickly by the fog. The others called after him, voices tight with worry, but Mike pressed on, drawn by something unseen, something compelling. Minutes stretched into an agonizing silence. Then Mike was gone. Panic gripped the remaining three. They called out his name, their voices breaking through the stillness, but there was no response, only the relentless whispering and the shifting fog. When they retraced his path, all they found was his flashlight, abandoned and flickering weakly, lying half-buried beneath damp leaves. Desperate, they returned to their campsite, hoping to regroup and find some clue. But what awaited them was far worse. The site was disturbed, their belongings no longer where they had left them. Backpacks were emptied, contents scattered and arranged with deliberate precision. Sticks laid out in strange, angular patterns, stones balanced unnaturally on roots, and a circle of small twigs enclosing their fire pit. And there were footprints, dozens of them, pressed deep into the soft earth, encircling the tent in an unbroken ring. None matched the boots of the group. The prints varied wildly in size and shape, some large and heavy, others small and narrow, as if a dozen different creatures had paced quietly through the night. Some appeared to be half-formed, smudged or fading, like shadows captured in mud. Fear settled over the group like a thick shroud. They took turns watching through the night, but the forest remained alive with soundless movement. Something stalked their perimeter, waiting, and as dawn approached, the silence felt heavier than ever, as if the forest itself was preparing to claim more than just one of them. Desperation drove the three remaining friends to follow the faint traces of Mike's disappearance, hoping against hope to find him alive somewhere in the dense woods. But the forest refused to yield its secrets. As they pressed deeper into the maze of trees and fog, the world around them seemed to shift and warp. Trails that moments before had appeared clear and straightforward began to loop back on themselves. Familiar landmarks vanished only to reappear in places that made no sense. Time lost all meaning. Their compass spun aimlessly, and GPS signals flickered and died. The forest seemed alive in a way they had never imagined, twisting, turning, and swallowing their every attempt to escape. Every direction they chose led them further into the unknown, as if the very ground beneath their feet was moving beneath the weight of unseen forces. Nightfall came like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The silence was shattered suddenly by a blood-curdling scream, raw, desperate, echoing through the trees like a cry from another world. It was Mike's voice, or at least something bearing his voice, carrying terror and pleading. The friends ran toward the sound, hearts pounding, lungs burning with cold air. But the scream abruptly ceased. And what followed was a silence so deep, so complete, it pressed down on them like a physical weight, a silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. They stood frozen, breath caught, surrounded by darkness that felt impossibly dense and watchful. Days later, search teams found the three survivors stumbling out near the forest's edge, exhausted, confused, and unable to offer any clear explanation for what had happened or where Mike had gone. Their clothes were torn, their eyes haunted with memories they couldn't fully share. Among their recovered belongings was one of their cameras, still recording. When investigators reviewed the footage, they found something chilling, a fleeting, shadowy figure lurking just beyond the trees. The shape was indistinct, its edges blurred like smoke drifting on the wind, but it moved with purpose, silently observing the group as they wandered through the fog. What they encountered in Cedar Ridge, no one knows for certain. The forest offers no answers, only silence and shadow. But one thing is clear, Cedar Ridge is not a place that welcomes visitors. It holds its own rules, its own guardians, and it never forgets those who trespass. Deep within Oregon's wild landscape lies Asphalt Trail, a place shaped by fire, where ancient volcanic eruptions left scars on the earth that have never fully healed. The ground is cracked and brittle, dusted with fine ash, while towering pines stand like silent watchers over a land steeped in stories older than memory. For centuries, local tribes have shared legends about this trail, tales of spirits caught between worlds, bound to the ash and stone, whispering warnings through the wind. Travelers who pass here often speak of strange whistles that carry across the trees, a sound that chills the blood and unsettles the mind. In the summer of 2020, three seasoned hikers, Josh, Lena, and Brian, set out to test themselves on this demanding trail. Each brought their own strengths: Josh's steady leadership, Lena's deep knowledge of local folklore, and Brian's sharp senses. Together, they were prepared for a rugged adventure through the volcanic terrain and dense forests, eager to push their limits. But beneath their excitement lay a quiet unease, an awareness that this was no ordinary hike, and that some parts of the wilderness hold onto secrets that refuse to stay buried. As they stepped onto Ashfall Trail, the rocky earth crunching beneath their boots and tribal symbols carved into weathered wood marking their path, none could foresee how the haunting whispers of the past would soon come alive around them. As twilight slipped into night, the trio set up camp beneath the towering pines, the volcanic ash dusting the ground like a ghostly powder beneath their feet. The air, once crisp and alive with distant bird calls, grew still and heavy, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Flames from their small campfire flickered weakly, casting long shadows that danced and stretched against the ancient trees. The rocky landscape, so stark in daylight, took on a spectral quality in the dim light, jagged silhouettes rising out of the darkness like forgotten sentinels. It began quietly at first, a soft, high-pitched whistle, faint enough to be mistaken for the wind threading through the branches. But as the night deepened, the sound grew more persistent. It circled their tent, ebbing and flowing like a breath on the edge of hearing. The whistle was unnatural, too deliberate, too melodic to be just a trick of the wind. It brushed past them in fleeting waves, close enough that the hikers could swear they heard faint notes carried just beyond the firelight. Lena was the first to notice something else: strange markings on a nearby tree, almost hidden in the darkness. She approached cautiously, the flickering light revealing old rope scars gouged deep into the bark, their edges worn but still raw-looking. Surrounding the scars were symbols, primitive carvings etched into the wood, faded but unmistakable. They looked ritualistic, remnants of some ancient practice or warning. Lena's heart quickened. The carvings spoke of the trail's darker history, stories she had heard whispered in legends, tales of those who had been captured, bound, or worse, by forces that refused to be named. The whistle seemed to respond to her discovery, rising in pitch and intensity, circling closer, as if the forest itself was alive and aware. Shadows flickered beyond the fire's reach, shapes twisting just beyond sight. The men grew tense, voices hushed as they exchanged uneasy glances. What was once a simple hiking trip was becoming something far more unsettling. The air around them thickened with the weight of unseen watchers, and the night whispered promises of dread yet to come. As darkness deepened around their campsite, the mysterious whistle continued to drift through the trees, growing louder, sharper, sometimes soft and teasing, sometimes shrill and demanding. Josh, Lena, and Brian found themselves frozen in place at times, the sound weaving through the night like an invisible thread pulling at their nerves. The whispers of the forest seemed to grow urgent, as if unseen eyes watched them from every shadowed branch and rocky crevice. One night, just as the moon dipped behind a cloud, Josh spotted something strange beyond the flickering firelight, a figure standing silently at the edge of the clearing. At first, he thought it was Brian, or perhaps Lena, but the shape was too still, too unnatural. It resembled a man, but its posture was rigid, unnerving, and the faintest hint of a whistle seemed to emanate from it, chilling Josh to the bone. The figure vanished the moment Josh blinked, leaving only the whistle hanging in the cold air. When he shared what he saw, the others nodded silently, their faces pale, confirming they too had glimpsed fleeting shadows lurking just beyond their vision. The campsite itself began to change, subtly but unmistakably. Stones and sticks around the fire pit were rearranged into strange, circular patterns that no one remembered making. The fire's warmth seemed to wane inexplicably, and the night air grew colder with every passing hour. Then came the footprints. By morning, a circle of deep, heavy prints encircled their tent. Dozens of them, some human-like but distorted, others too large and misshapen to belong to any known creature. The prints were arranged with chilling precision, as if the night's watchers had carefully paced their vigil, measuring and marking territory. The friends' unease blossomed into fear. They realized this was no ordinary trail, no random forest sound. Something else was here, something ancient and watchful, and it was letting them know they were intruders. As night deepened, the air grew colder still, and the whistling no longer circled from a distance. It seemed to surround them, pressing in from every shadow, every rustling branch, every creaking tree. The sound was no longer a mere melody. It had become a language, an eerie, haunting cadence that reverberated through the dense forest like a pulse, syncopated with the pounding of their hearts. Josh, Lena, and Brian packed quickly, deciding to abandon the campsite and flee the trail. But the forest had other plans. As they moved, the landscape began to twist around them, trees seeming to shift positions, familiar landmarks dissolving into unrecognizable shapes in the thick, choking fog. Paths they thought they knew looped back endlessly, trapping them in a maze of shadow and mist. The very forest seemed to breathe, inhale and exhale, closing off escape routes with a slow, deliberate precision. Then, from somewhere deep within the darkness, came the scream. A guttural, piercing cry that tore through the night air and shattered the fragile silence. It was raw and desperate, like a soul caught between worlds, a scream not belonging to any human, yet bearing the unmistakable weight of agony and terror. The friends froze, paralyzed as the echo of that scream twisted and faded into silence, silence so absolute it felt suffocating. Panicked, they pressed forward blindly, desperate to put distance between themselves and the haunting sound. But the forest's hold tightened. The fog thickened, swallowing their footsteps and muffling their voices. Shadows flickered at the edge of vision, moving with unnatural speed and purpose, always just out of reach. Every glance behind revealed nothing but empty darkness, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Lena's breath hitched as a cold whisper grazed her ear, a sound so faint she feared she imagined it. But Brian heard it too, a low, almost mournful whistle calling their names, pulling them deeper into the labyrinthine woods. Their hope dwindled, replaced by a creeping certainty that the spirits of Asphalt Trail were not mere legends, but living terrors, guiding them into a place from which they might never return. After what felt like hours trapped within the shifting shadows and endless fog, Josh and Brian finally broke free from the forest's grasp. They emerged near the trailhead at dawn, exhausted, disoriented, and forever changed. Lena, however, remained missing, swallowed by the night and the whispering pines. The whistle, that eerie, haunting call, followed them out of the woods, slipping through their dreams and waking hours alike. It echoed in the silence between their thoughts, a chilling reminder that whatever had pursued them was not done. Months later, Lena's belongings were found near an abandoned cabin at the forest's edge, along with a faded, leather-bound diary. The pages were brittle, ink smeared by time, but the words within revealed a chilling history. Tales written by an early settler who chronicled encounters with the mountain spirits. The diary spoke of a curse placed upon Asphalt Trail, a warning left by those who had vanished long before. Those who disrespect the land, who venture too deep without reverence, awaken the restless whistlers, spirits bound to the ash and stone, guardians of the mountain's secrets. The settlers believed these whistlers were souls of the lost, hikers, hunters, and travelers caught between worlds, tasked with protecting the mountain from outsiders. Their mournful whistles serve as warnings, but also as lures, drawing the careless deeper into the forest's cold embrace. Some say that if you listen closely on a still night near Asphalt Trail, you can still hear the whistlers, low, haunting melodies weaving through the trees, forever guarding their realm and reminding all who dare tread there that some places are not meant to be disturbed. Emily was no stranger to the wild. An experienced solo hiker, she had conquered some of the most challenging trails across the country, driven by a fierce desire to push her limits and document every step of her journey. Yet nothing had prepared her for Pine Hollow. This dense, sprawling forest was infamous among locals, not for its beauty, but for the eerie silence that seemed to seep from its shadowed depths and for the frequent radio blackouts that swallowed every attempt to reach the outside world. Travelers who ventured into Pine Hollow often spoke in hushed tones of strange disappearances and unsettling sensations. But for Emily, this was the ultimate challenge. She wanted to prove that she could face the unknown and come back with a story to tell. As she stepped into the forest, the canopy above closed tight, blotting out much of the daylight and plunging the woods into a twilight gloom even at midday. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, but there was something else, something heavier, that hung in the stillness, a quiet weight that pressed down on her chest with each step. Emily's boots crunched softly against the littered forest floor, the only sound in a place that felt utterly devoid of life. She set up her camp near a small clearing, her equipment arranged with practiced precision. Her radio, a lifeline in remote areas, was already showing signs of strain. The signal flickered and crackled, refusing to connect to any familiar frequency. Emily shrugged it off as a quirk of the terrain, but as she adjusted her gear, a chill ran down her spine, and she caught herself glancing nervously into the dense thicket beyond the firelight. There was a stillness here unlike anywhere else she'd been. No chirping birds, no rustling animals, not even the whisper of wind through the needles. The forest held its breath, watching, waiting. The towering pines stood like silent sentinels, their dark forms looming ominously, and the shadows between them twisted and stretched in ways that seemed almost unnatural. Emily reminded herself this was just a place, a stretch of wilderness. She was strong, prepared, ready. Yet as night fell and the darkness wrapped around her like a shroud, that quiet weight deepened, settling into something far more unsettling. A sense that the forest wasn't just a collection of trees and earth, but a presence. And it was aware. As Emily settled deeper into Pine Hollow, the forest silence began to press in on her with an almost physical weight. She reached for her radio, hoping to check in with base camp or pick up a weather update. But the familiar static was worse than she expected. Sharp bursts of white noise, followed by long stretches of dead air. At times, through the crackling interference, faint, unintelligible whispers seemed to weave themselves into the static, like ghostly voices trapped between frequencies. Emily adjusted the dial, trying desperately to find a clear signal, but the device only hissed and sputtered, as if the forest itself was blocking her calls for help. The unsettling glitches didn't end there. Her GPS flickered erratically, showing shifting coordinates that made no sense, placing her far from any mapped trail or landmark. The technology that once provided a comforting connection to the outside world now betrayed her, plunging her further into isolation. More alarming than the failing electronics was the unnatural stillness around her. The usual sounds of life, birds calling, insects buzzing, leaves rustling in the breeze, had all but vanished. The forest lay utterly silent, save for the soft crunch of her own footsteps. There was no wind to stir the towering pines, no scurrying of animals through the underbrush. Even the distant calls of wildlife, so common in the wilderness, were absent. It was a silence that screamed. Emily's senses heightened, every hair on her skin prickling with unease. The stillness felt deliberate, as if the forest were holding its breath, watching her, waiting. Shadows grew longer and darker, moving just beyond the reach of her flashlight's beam. The line between reality and something else seemed to blur. This was no ordinary quiet. It was the calm before something terrible. As evening fell, the heavy silence around Emily turned into something far more unsettling. Every sound she made, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, the snap of a twig, echoed through the still air like a warning. Then, just beyond the reach of her flashlight, she caught sight of a figure. It was there, standing motionless among the trees, watching. The fading light barely revealed its shape, tall and unmoving, face hidden in shadow. Emily called out, voice shaky, but the figure didn't respond or even shift. When she took a step closer, it disappeared as if swallowed by the darkness itself. Suddenly, the forest seemed to change. The trail she had followed without trouble twisted in ways that made no sense. Trees appeared where there were none moments before. Familiar landmarks vanished. Branches reached out, snagging her clothing and blocking every turn. The sky darkened far sooner than it should have, and the shadows grew longer and thicker, curling around her like silent watchers. Panic settled deep in Emily's chest. Her flashlight flickered, casting strange, shifting shapes just beyond her sight. Roots and rocks seemed to catch her feet intentionally, forcing her off balance. With every step, she felt herself sinking deeper into the forest's tangled maze. Whispered voices rose from the trees, low, rough sounds that she couldn't understand, but they carried a warning. She was not meant to be here. Her instincts screamed to run, but every path led her back to where she had started or into darker parts of the woods. The shadows seemed alive, moving quickly just beyond the light, always closing in but never fully revealed. The forest was no longer a place of trees and earth. It was something else, something watching, waiting, and refusing to let her go. As darkness swallowed Pine Hollow, Emily's panic deepened into something raw and desperate. She fumbled for her radio, breath ragged and hands trembling, and sent out a frantic SOS. Her voice cracked as she repeated her location, pleading for anyone to hear her over the crackling static. But the radio's reply was nothing but harsh, distorted noise, a relentless hiss that swallowed her words and then faded into an eerie silence. The forest around her seemed to lean in closer, thick shadows gathering like unseen eyes watching her every move. Her flashlight flickered violently, throwing erratic beams into the blackness, but the light never reached far enough to cut through the dense trees and swirling mist. Then, just beyond the edge of the glow, a whisper drifted to her ears, soft yet clear, a voice carried on the cold night air. It called her name, slow and deliberate, almost gentle, but with a weight that sent a chill racing down her spine. Emily's camera, still rolling, captured this final moment. The whisper repeated, drawing her forward into the darkness beyond her sight. Her trembling hand reached out, the beam of her flashlight trembling as it illuminated a shadowed figure standing silently just past the trees. The shape was indistinct, blurred as if it shifted with the mist itself, but its presence was undeniable, silent, still waiting. The last images showed Emily turning toward the figure, her face pale with fear and disbelief, as the whisper echoed again. Emily, before the screen cut to black. When search teams finally arrived at Pine Hollow, they found Emily's gear scattered near the edge of the forest. Her backpack, camera, and radio abandoned as if dropped in haste. But there was no sign of Emily herself. No footprints leading away, no clues to where she might have gone. It was as if she had simply vanished into the very air. The only answers came from the last moments captured on her camera. Investigators watched in silence as the haunting footage played. The flickering flashlight, the cold whisper calling her name, and the dark, shifting figure standing just beyond the light. The whispers, distorted and chilling, seemed to echo long after the tape ended. Locals say that Pine Hollow holds something restless, a presence bound to the shadows and silence, watching and waiting for the next traveler foolish enough to enter its depths. Some believe the forest itself is a trap, a place where the boundary between the living and something else grows thin, where voices from beyond can reach through the dark. To this day, hikers near Pine Hollow report hearing soft whispers carried on the wind, voices calling their names when no one is near. The forest remains silent to all but those it chooses, guarding its secrets and its victims with an unsettling patience. What lingers in Pine Hollow is still waiting, watching, and it will not rest until it finds another visitor. As the darkness settles and these stories fade into the quiet, I want to ask you, which of these true hiking tales sent the deepest chill down your spine? Have you ever felt something you couldn't explain while out in the wild? Maybe a whisper in the trees or a shadow just beyond your sight? Share your experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the next one we tell. If these chilling journeys into the unknown kept you on edge tonight, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. There's more waiting in the shadows, more true horror stories that will make you think twice before your next adventure. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the forest is watching.